Welcome back. The Right to Know campaign has released a report titled "Spooked" on surveillance of journalists in South Africa. While Right to Know has revealed that surveillance in South Africa affects all members of society, according to this report, journalists in particular seem to be the target of state spying and more recently, even private sector spying. And this seems to be especially true for journalists who have uncovered corruption, state capture and abuse of power in agencies such as the National Prosecuting Authority. The State Security Agency as well as the Crime Intelligence Division of the police also fall into that category, as well as the Hawks. And on this subject of this report, we are now joined by Murray Hunter, and he is the Right to Know's Secrecy and Securitization Organiser, and he joins us from our studios in Parliament. Murray, good morning and thanks for speaking to us. Let's start off
very much for having me.
By just taking a look at the methodology you used to compile this particular report. What did you do to get to the information?
I think the very difficult thing and one of the issues that we're grappling with as a society when it comes to detecting when we've been spied on, when our private information has been abused, is that surveillance happens in secret. And in terms of RICO, which is our main surveillance law, if someone is monitoring your phone or if your cell phone provider is forced to hand over your records to the police, they're actually forbidden from ever telling you that it happened. Which means that when these abuses happen, it's often very difficult for journalists to know that it's happened. So what we've looked at is about 10 case studies where it has been confirmed through documentary evidence, in some cases through court documents, in many cases because a journalist with sources in the intelligence sector will get a tip-off to say, watch out, someone is spying on you. And that's one of the reasons why we were able to put together this report. So we simply interview these journalists, we get them to tell their stories, and we're trying to piece together the evidence that it's happening so that the rest of us, so members of the public, can look at the evidence and start to see the patterns so we can start to make steps to protect our own privacy as well.
So with regard to journalists, because it is in the nature of a journalist's job to ask the tough questions, to ask very pointed and often uncomfortable questions in trying to hold people accountable. So if journalists are now being spied on, what does that mean for the profession?
Yeah, I think the nub of this is that we rely on the media, we rely on journalists to bring us stories into the light that would otherwise remain in the shadows. And often, in the South African context, that often means stories of abuse of power, stories of corruption, of secret deals and that sort of thing. And that sort of journalism relies on whistleblowers, on confidential sources, people who occupy a position of power, who know what's going on, and basically go to a journalist to tell their story. And we know that protecting the identity of those whistleblowers is so important. This is not only a South African problem, but we know that this is a tough place for whistleblowers. We know that these people are targeted. And it appears that journalists' phones are being spied on simply to try to identify who their sources are. And this is, I think, the real concern, and this is why we say that surveillance of journalists is essentially an attack on the public's right to know, because it has this effect of warning off whistleblowers, of silencing journalists and their sources so that these stories don't come to public light.
And of course, Murray, that's the one thing. But as you rightly point out, this is not peculiar to South Africa by any means. We saw in France last year, they had an entire investigation into the exact same type of matter. But what recourse do journalists have?
I think that the real difficulty has been in proving that this is happening. As I said, it often happens in secret and it's difficult to get confirmation. We do know that if you are spied on illegally, you should take legal action. And in one case at least, we know that this has led to, in fact, the whole RICO law is now facing a constitutional challenge brought by one of the journalists who was spied on. That's Sam Sol and the Amabungani Center for Investigative Journalism. And this could lead to a huge change in the right to privacy and a huge constitutional judgment on the right to privacy in South Africa, which would be very good. We see, unfortunately, often not only members of the media, but also other members of the public who are spied on often don't take action, or we found that in the avenues that you're supposed to have, such as the watchdog bodies, are often really not responsive, and we're hoping to change that as well.
Well, Murray, we're going to have to leave it there for today, but thank you so much for coming through. Murray Hunter is a Right to Know's researcher talking to us about a report issued by the Right to Know campaign on how journalists investigating corruption are being spied on by both state agencies and the private sector. And if you'd like to read that report, do go to their website. It does make for some quite interesting reading. We are now going to go to a break and